What if violins and epic 7-minute prog suites could break into rock's mainstream arena status and sell millions? 6 Topeka kids conquered America while critics scoffed. Then one man had a spiritual revival and refused to compromise. His salvation became their destruction. 15 million albums couldn't hold a brotherhood together when faith collided with fame. Decades later, they still won't share a stage. This is how Kansas became legends by never bending, then shattered because no one would bend. Topeka, Kansas. It's the early 1970s. While the music world fixated on the coasts, London's prog rock sophistication, Los Angeles' singer-songwriter cool, New York's art rock pretension, 6 young musicians were forging something entirely different in America's heartland. They weren't chasing trends. They couldn't afford to. They were building their sound in isolation, far from any scene that mattered. The band that would become Kansas emerged from the wreckage of 2 local groups, Saratoga and White Clover. But getting there required surviving 2 earlier failed attempts at fusion. The problem was fundamental. Half the musicians wanted straightforward hard rock, the kind that made you move. The other half dreamed of orchestral complexity, the kind that made you think. Drummer Phil Ehart and bassist Dave Hope pushed for conventional hard rock direction. Guitarist and keyboardist Kerry Livgren wanted something far more ambitious, an orchestral jazz rock classical sound that would prove the Midwest could match anything Europe was producing. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The tension was creative warfare, but somehow, when they added vocalist Steve Walsh, guitarist Rich Williams, and violinist Robbie Steinhardt, the pieces locked into place, not through compromise, but through sheer force of will. They would play both sounds simultaneously, violins dueling with electric guitars, classical training colliding with rock and roll fury. They understood their disadvantage. Rich Williams said it plainly. The Midwest is no musical mecca. They'd endured what he called destitute poor times with nothing to fall back on except ourselves. But that isolation became their strength. Without a scene to impress, without industry gatekeepers watching, they could experiment. They could fail. They could become something nobody expected. Kerry Livgren's goal was radical for its time. Maintain popularity in spite of whatever trend was happening. No compromises for a hit. In an era when bands were constantly chasing the next sound, the next fashion, Kansas decided to stand still and let the world come to them. The pivotal moment arrived in 1973 when their demo tape reached Don Kirshner, the pop impresario best known for creating The Monkees. Kirshner sent his vice president, Wally Gold, to see them perform at the Opera House in Ellenwood, Kansas. According to band legend, to ensure a packed house, the band advertised free beer for anyone who showed up. Gold walked into a beer-fueled Kansas bar crowd and witnessed 6 musicians who could outplay anyone he'd heard in years. Kirshner signed them immediately. Their self-titled debut dropped in 1974 and peaked at number 174. By industry standards, it was a failure, but Kansas wasn't measuring success by chart position. They were building something that would last. Song for America followed, then Mask. Each album sold modestly but consistently. They were becoming an albums band, the kind with a devoted cult following, but no crossover hit. And in the mid-1970s music business, that meant you were living on borrowed time. By 1976, Kansas had toured relentlessly for years. They had become what Kerry Livgren called a hot property as an opening act. So hot, in fact, that headliners stopped wanting to follow them. Mick Fleetwood later admitted that Fleetwood Mac died a death every time we went on first. Kansas was too good, too powerful, too tight. But opening act status meant limited income, limited exposure, limited future. Don Kirshner delivered an ultimatum as they prepared their 4th album, Leftoverture. This was their final throw of the dice. Either they delivered a hit single, or the label was done investing in their progressive rock dreams. The pressure was suffocating. Then came disaster. On the first day of rehearsals, Steve Walsh announced he had nothing, not a single song. The co-writer who'd helped shape their sound was creatively empty. Kerry Livgren would have to provide roughly 70% of the album's material. Years later, Kerry Livgren admitted, "The pressure brought out the best in me. But at that moment, it felt like drowning." The band worked up 7 songs, including the sprawling epic Magnum Opus. Then, almost as an afterthought, Kerry Livgren brought in one more piece, a spontaneous acoustic creation he wasn't even sure belonged on a Kansas album. He called it "Carry On Wayward Son." Drummer Phil Ehart would later marvel that such a very, very special song barely made the record. It was the last one added an afterthought, a Hail Mary.
Carry on my wayward son.
Released in November 1976, "Carry On Wayward Son" became the anthem Kansas had spent years earning. It peaked at number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. But its cultural impact was far greater than any chart position could measure. The song wasn't just a hit, it was validation. The Midwest finally had a band to call its own. Not a British import, not a California dream. This was heartland rock that could stand beside anything the coasts produced. Leftoverture shot to number 5 on the Billboard 200 and eventually went 5 times platinum. Suddenly, Kansas wasn't an opening act anymore. They were arena headliners. The beautiful irony? "Carry On Wayward Son" was autobiographical. Kerry Livgren's documentation of his own spiritual quest, searching for truth and meaning in a world that felt increasingly empty despite mounting success. The spiritual journey that created their breakthrough would eventually destroy everything they had built together. But in 1977, that destruction was still years away. They were just 6 brothers who'd proven the doubters wrong, playing sold-out arenas and hearing 50,000 voices sing their words back to them. Success brought no rest. Kansas immediately began work on their follow-up, Point of No Return. Released in October 1977, the album peaked at number 4, their highest charting record, and went quadruple platinum 4 million copies. The album cover became iconic, that stylized Kansas logo, the figure navigating past a geographical limit, symbolic of breaking every boundary the industry had tried to impose on them. But the relentless pace was taking its toll. Steve Walsh briefly quit during the recording sessions, later admitting he'd become a prima donna and was seriously considering a solo career. The exhaustion was real. The egos were expanding. They were 6 men who'd survived poverty together, but prosperity was proving far more dangerous to their unity. The cracks were already forming. Success hadn't brought peace. It had brought exhaustion, ego, and the first hints that this brotherhood might not survive its own ambition. Kerry Livgren brought another last-minute addition to the sessions, a simple acoustic piece born from a finger-picking exercise. He told his bandmates, "You guys probably won't like this because this is an acoustic song." It was sparse, intimate, nothing like the complex arrangements Kansas was known for. He called it "Dust in the Wind."
All we are is dust in the wind.
Released as a single in January 1978, "Dust in the Wind" became their only top 10 hit, peaking at number 6. But more than that, it became the song that would outlive everything else in their catalog. A meditation on mortality, paraphrasing the biblical book of Ecclesiastes. All we do, all we are, crumbles to dust. All we are is dust in the wind. The fact that their biggest popular success was a quiet reflection on death introduced a bittersweet quality to their peak. Even in triumph, Kansas was singing about endings. The song felt like a goodbye, though nobody could articulate why. For fans who'd grown up with Kansas, who'd driven back roads with Leftoverture in their 8-track players, who'd felt that surge of pride when a Midwest band proved it could matter, "Dust in the Wind" hit differently than other hits. It wasn't about celebration, it was about the fleeting nature of everything, including the moment they were living. The golden era was already ending, and the song seemed to know it before anyone else did. The band's dominance proved remarkably short-lived. Monolith arrived in 1979, peaked at number 10, went platinum, but failed to deliver a significant single songs. From the album were quickly cut from live sets because fans weren't responding. Audio Visions in 1980 barely cracked the top 30. The momentum was evaporating, but the real crisis wasn't commercial, it was spiritual. Kerry Livgren experienced a profound conversion to Christianity. The philosophical seeking that had fueled "Carry On Wayward Son" had found its answer. For Kerry Livgren, this was salvation, the end of years of searching, the peace he'd been writing about. His lyrics began to shift, replacing mystical imagery with overt Christian themes. Bassist Dave Hope also converted. Suddenly, two members of Kansas had found absolute conviction. And conviction, when it collides with art, rarely compromises. Steve Walsh was a committed non-Christian. The difference in lyrical content between Kerry Livgren's new songs and Walsh's material became impossible to ignore. When Kerry Livgren presented his faith-reflective songs for the next album, Walsh refused to sing them. He couldn't put his voice to words he didn't believe. The breaking point arrived in October 1981. Steve Walsh quit. Not gradually, not with warning. He was simply gone, taking his accumulated material with him. His departure created what the band called a 5-song void and shattered the creative partnership that had produced their masterpieces. This was the ultimate drama. Two men who'd built a brotherhood through years of poverty and perseverance now stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. No villain, no betrayal. Just one man choosing faith over fame, and another choosing artistic freedom over compromise. Both were right. Both were wrong. And the band they'd built together was the casualty. The remaining members decided to carry on. They recruited vocalist John Elefante, whose audition tape impressed them enough to gamble their future on an unknown. The Elefante-led lineup released vinyl Confessions in 1982, which peaked at number 16 and delivered a top 20 hit, Play the Game Tonight. But Elefante, talented as he was, couldn't recreate the Walsh-Livgren magic, and the overt Christian themes alienated large segments of their progressive rock fan base, who'd come for complex musicianship and philosophical exploration, not religious testimony. The faith that gave one man purpose fractured the band he'd built. By 1984, Kerry Livgren and Dave Hope had also departed. Kansas temporarily dissolved. Steve Walsh formed Streets, chasing the commercial sound of bands like Foreigner and Journey, the exact mainstream direction he had rejected with Kansas. In 1986, Phil Ehart and Rich Williams reformed Kansas with a crucial addition. Steve Walsh returned. To survive in the MTV era, they underwent radical surgery. The album Power fully embraced hard rock and pop rock, intentionally subduing their progressive roots. The complex 7-minute epics were gone. They were chasing radio play in an era that had moved on from everything they represented. The single All I Wanted became their 7th and final top 40 hit, peaking at number 19 in 1987. The irony was almost too painful. Walsh had returned to lead Kansas in the exact commercial direction he'd left to pursue. To achieve one last chart success, Kansas had to compromise the very no compromises vision Livgren had established 15 years earlier. Critics noted the band's pompous sound felt dated. The subsequent album, In the Spirit of Things, received minimal label support. MCA dropped them after an internal shakeup. Steve Morse, the guitar virtuoso they'd recruited, departed. The failure confirmed what many 1970s artists were learning. The analog heroes of the past couldn't successfully transition to the sleek, digitized MTV world Kansas had survived by stubbornly refusing to change, then died by changing too much. Throughout the chaos, only Phil Ehart and Rich Williams remained constant, ensuring Kansas survived even if the spirit was unrecognizable. Despite the conflicts, the commercial failures, the revolving door of members, Kansas never truly disappeared. They spent the 1990s touring, playing casinos and state fairs, sustained by fans who refused to forget. The most profound moment came in 2000 with Somewhere to Elsewhere. The original lineup reuniting in the studio for the first time in 20 years, Kerry Livgren returned as primary songwriter. Steve Walsh returned to sing. For one brief moment, the men who'd torn each other apart recognized the unique magic they'd created together. It couldn't last. Steve Walsh retired for good in 2014, but Kansas continues, anchored by Ehart and Williams, with new musicians honoring the original vision. They released new albums in 2016 and 2020, proving the Heartland progressive dream refuses to die completely. The numbers tell their own story. Over 30 million albums sold worldwide. Carry On Wayward Son remains one of the 5 most played classic rock tracks. Featured in everything from the TV show Supernatural to the hit film Anchorman, Phil Ehart notes that when the a cappella intro kicks in live, there isn't an audience in the world that doesn't go crazy. For the generation that grew up with Kansas, their music represents something irreplaceable. A time when musicianship mattered, when ambition was rewarded, when ordinary kids from nowhere could become extraordinary through sheer determination. The songs became bigger than the men who created them. And perhaps that's the ultimate legacy, that the music survived everything the band couldn't. The internal wars, the ideological splits, the commercial pressures that would have destroyed lesser acts Kansas endured, because the songs themselves refused to become dust in the wind. Kansas proved the Heartland could match anything the coast produced, but they also revealed a harder truth. Brotherhood built on shared dreams can fracture when those dreams lead to different destinations. The same conviction that created their greatest songs destroyed the partnership that made those songs possible. Their legacy isn't just the music, it's the reminder that some things, once broken, can never fully heal. What part of the Kansas story resonates with you most? Drop your memories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of rock's greatest triumphs and tragedies.